Thank you, sir. Please give it up. Lots of noise. More noise.
How did you find it?
Welcome, everybody. So we'll go ahead and we'll just we'll just start talking to the crowd. How does that sound? Go at the beginning, yeah?
Excellent.
Okay, so, let's just start off with something simple. Like, how are you enjoying your con so far?
Well, speaking for myself, it is remarkable to me to see how many of you have shown up to see us. It's very, very unusual for any movie in today's disposable entertainment world to have lasted for 55 years. And I'm shocked. So we are just so glad to see you.
Please never ever forget that without you here, without you caring about our little film, we wouldn't be here. We are so, so grateful to you for giving us a legacy that we never ever dreamed we would have. So thank you all for that.
I'm continually surprised at how many of you weren't even born in 1968. And you just love the film. It's part of your life, and we are very grateful. Yes, thank you.
Like you said, in this day of disposable entertainment, this is one that has just stood the test of time, and I think will for forever. This one is never going to go away, no matter what new technology or new film comes out.
Well, you start to think we broke a lot of barriers back in 1968. Just having a black man and white woman in a film together was unheard of at that time. Having a young girl kill her mother, having everybody die in the film. Nobody, there was always somebody who survived in horror film up to that time. But the barriers we broke, I think, truly helped us continue this legacy.
And that was thank you to the storytelling ability of John Russo and George Romero. I mean, we all had so-called roundtable idea sessions about what if this happened, what if that happened. But ultimately, it was the responsibility of George and John Russo to put the final story together, and they did a hell of a job.
It's such a simple story, but it's so effective.
Survival.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like you said about the breaking racial boundaries, it's pretty phenomenal.
If I may, if you all recall, no mention was made in that film that there's a black man. No color was brought up. It was human beings doing their best to survive, which is what we're all about on this planet anyway. To me, that's what touches my heart most about our film. Do we have? Oh, here comes.
Here they are. All right, guys.
Very good, excellent.
Yes. Let's do this again. We've lost Kyra. All right, guys, I'm going to start off with the official questions because, that was just like killing time talking.
But we hit some very important.
We got quick. Well, like we said, it's a very important movie. I would love to know how you all got involved in the beginning with Night of the Living Dead. What was your audition like? What happened?
Well, about 8 years before Night of the Living Dead came to be, George Romero and I were two struggling young filmmakers in Pittsburgh, and frankly, we had to do something to keep groceries on the table. So we formed a film production company to make TV commercials, business films, that kind of thing. And that was in the beginning of the 60s. And our company became successful enough making TV commercials and business films that we knew that the ambition always was that we wanted at some point to make what we referred to as a real movie. We had no idea what that real movie would be, but we knew we wanted to make one. And so we kept at it over a period of over the 60s, basically. And by the time 66 rolled around, we had enough equipment, editing equipment, production equipment, to actually make our own film. And that's when the Night of the Living Dead started to develop ahead of steam. And we hooked up with a company by the name of Hardman Associates. Hardman Associates did the same kind of thing that we did, except in audio production. They did radio shows, they did radio commercials, that kind of thing. And Judith Ridley worked with them at the time that we were getting the two companies together. And Carl, I won't get into Judy's part of the story, Judy O'Day's part of the story, but Carl was the co-producer of the film once we decided to make it, and he introduced us to Judy O'Day, although years before, Judy and I were at the Pittsburgh Playhouse in a musical. I was a chorus boy and she was a chorus girl in a farcical music called Leave It to Jane. And that's when we first became aware of one another. So I'll let her then pick up with her story about how she got involved.
You've heard the expression that who you know can make a difference. It really worked in this case. Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman worked at the Hardman Associates. By that time, I was in my very, very early 20s, I think 21, 22. I had spread my wings from musical theater into television, variety shows. I was on the local TV and I'd sing up a storm. But I also went into radio and TV commercial work, audio work. We did so much of that at Hardman Associates. I got to know Carl and Marilyn extremely well. Well, back in '67, I thought, I want to make it big in Hollywood. I was so excited to be a young working actress. Went off to Hollywood. Within that year, I got a call from Carl Hardman saying, Russ, Streiner, George Romero, Marilyn and I want to make a film, Jack Russo. Would you be willing to come back and audition for it? I left Hollywood, got on a plane, came back to Pittsburgh, auditioned. I don't know if I can tell you much about that audition, except George didn't say anything. I just did what I was asked to do, and then I left, never thinking that possibly I would be in the film. But as luck would have it, because I knew Carl and he very kindly invited me, George chose me to be Barbara, and I will thank him to the day I die.
I was a student at Art Institute, and I was waiting for the bus one evening on my way home, and I had my portfolio with me, and a young man stopped me and asked me if I was an art student. I said yes. He asked me if I did caricatures, and I said yes. And he told me that he had a client that would like to have caricatures done of all of their employees, their staff. And that was Hardman Associates. And so before I graduated, I had done everyone everyone in the staff, and most of them were in the film somewhere. And I knew George and I knew Russ from their trips over to Hardman Associates. And I decided that I would like to go to work for Russ and George. And I parted on very good terms with Carl and Marilyn. And so I went to work at Latent Image, and that's when they were casting for the film. I don't recall that I had an audition. I do remember reading for the part of Barbara, and I was dreadful, really stunk up the place. And so they created this little role of Judy for me, and that's how I got to be in it.
I replaced Judy at Hardman Associates, and I was actively working there when the movie started. I wasn't asked to be in it, I was told to be. I would work all day at the studio and then go out at night and work on the movie. So I wasn't interviewed for it at all.
And the question is, how did you get involved in Night of the Living Dead, and what was your audition like?
I replaced Paula at No, I was 9 years old when the movie started shooting, and I am Carl Hardman's daughter. So, you know, a little nepotism corrected in the scene there. But I woke up one morning and my mother woke me up for school and said, "Honey, you're gonna flip." And I said, "Why, is like school canceled or something?" And she said, "No, you're gonna be in a movie." So again, I was told that I was gonna be in a movie. And so I was a horror junkie by that time anyway, watching Bill Cardille on Chiller Theater. And so, you know, when I found out I was gonna be a monster in a movie, I was thrilled. So, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it sure is. We spoke a little bit earlier about how amazing this movie was in breaking racial boundaries and not talking about it. I wanted to know, do you guys have any memories about meeting or working with Dwayne Jones?
Dwayne Jones grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Duquesne, PA, but we didn't know him. We had a friend, a mutual friend by the name of Betty Ellen Haughey, who did know Dwayne. He was off at that time making a living as a struggling actor in New York, primarily live theater, and teaching theater in New York City. And Betty Ellen, who worked with a publisher friend of ours, knew that we were planning to make this film in 1960, started to get ahead of steam in 1967. So in 1968, Easter weekend, Dwayne was coming back to Pittsburgh to visit his family for Easter weekend. And Betty Ellen arranged with us that on his visit to his family, that he might be able to audition for the character of Ben. And we said, that's great, it works out for everybody. Up until that time, our friend Ruby Ritchie was supposed to play the character of Ben, and we were just moving forward. But as a courtesy to Betty Ellen and to Dwayne, we said, sure, you can audition. That Easter Sunday did it for us. He came in and auditioned. Carl and Marilyn were there. I was there. I don't know if you were there or not. And that was it. He delivered the Ben lines, and there was hands down, even Rudy Ritchie voted for him to be Ben. So that's how that all came together. I want to put one footnote on what Judy had to say about her working at Hardman Eastman. She was part of the casting process as well, although she may not remember it. She was an art student, and as our story developed, these were recently dead people because we didn't have the skills to do fantastic makeups of decayed bodies and all that. So we made them recently dead, okay? Recently dead would mean that somebody would probably be naked. Why don't we put a naked woman in it? Well,
Ridley said that?
no, we were discussing among ourselves.
Getting ahead of me.
So, we don't know any women that are willing to show up naked in a movie. So, fortunately, Judy, in her art classes, her life classes, happened to know a nude model. So, go ahead and tell the story how you recruited the nude model.
Her name is Carol. I don't know her last name. She was just lovely, and you know, it's a very hard thing to be a life model. You have to sit perfectly still for 20 minutes or so, don't move, and then when you do get a break, when you come back, you have to assume the exact same position. And she was I believe, a single mom, and she worked very hard. And so we approached her through the school, because she was still doing that job. She was still a life model, and she was willing to do that. I don't recall what happened. I mean, she came into the studio, obviously.
Yeah, and she was willing to do it.
Yes.
So-
Oh, I have to add to this. When she came in and we were on set, we were going to film, of course, everybody had to have makeup on. I don't know if it was George or someone who said, would anybody help put makeup on the naked lady? You've never seen people out of the woodwork as quickly at all school of folk. If you only have a few words, for me, for Dwayne, intellectual, a classy man, a very classy man. Smoked like a chimney, loved to read. When he wasn't on set working, he was sitting either talking with Carl because they were fast friends, smoking and reading something terribly intellectual. It was, I'm going to tell a story out of whatever it is, whatever the expression is, but remember in the movie where we are putting up the boards? I was trying in my catatonic way to help. Dwayne had a very difficult time with a hammer, trying to hit that nail. And by God, he had a tough time. He hit his thumb, I think, more than he ever hit the nail. It got to the point where we sink the nail almost into the wood, and then we put that up, and Dwayne would give it that final whack to get it in. But I'll never forget. I think he was far better actor than he was a carpenter.
I was only on the set when they were shooting my scenes. So, but I do recall Dwayne sitting under a tree in a lawn chair, like a director's chair, reading. He was quiet, he was eloquent, very regal looking gentleman. And I don't think any of us ever really thought about the color of his skin. It was a non-issue, ever. And, but everyone thought the world of him, really. He was just a fine man, a gentleman.
I didn't get to work with him, so I didn't know him.
threw me across the room. We did. I really loved Dwayne. Hi Jen. He was a very nice man, and he was very kind, and I know that he expressed concern about that scene where he had to sort of swing me over to the couch, and he was just, I admired him, and years later, I never stopped thinking about him. I always wanted to meet him again. He was good friends with my dad, and when my dad would go to New York for, various reasons, I don't know what, but they would always get together and have dinner and, chat. And I wish that I could have met him again and talked to him. I wish he were here. But yeah, he was really, he was interesting, he was kind, he was brilliant, talented, just really gifted.
Gone way too soon.
Yes.
Yeah. And speaking of your scene with him, how was it blocking that out? For real.
I was trying to attack him, and when I watched the movie, I can see myself like laughing because it was funny.
Yeah.
To me, but I laughed on camera, which if you watch carefully, you can see that. But yeah, it just seemed funny to me. It still seems funny. I don't know that I could ever do anything like that with a straight face, but yeah, he just kind of very gently, just kind of tossed me onto the couch. I mean, I didn't get hurt at all,
Right.
which was his concern. Like, I don't
Right.
want to hurt you, so he
Do.
didn't want to. I was never a little kid. I wasn't born, 8 feet tall, but he didn't want to like injure a kid. So no, there was no choreography. It was just bye.
I just wanted to ask, is it interesting, how do you feel just looking back at the film's legacy and zombies in particular? Are you familiar with like the other movies George Romero made, the Rest of the Dead trilogy, and just how his movies affected zombies and horror and film in general?
Very interesting question. George always had a concern. He and I were friends for 60 years by the time he passed away, and that friendship never ended. Was always sensitive to the fact that because of Night of the Living Dead, George, as the director, the industry has a tendency to try to pigeonhole you. Once you become noted for doing a particular kind of work, whether you're an artist or a writer or whatever, people expect you to replicate that success somehow. And I must say that George, although he became absolutely skillful about the genre and very sensitive to nuance about the genre, the business missed out by not exploring other paths of George Romero. He was capable of so much more, although each of his movies about zombies became very, very successful. He, in private conversations with him, he had so many great ideas and visualization of stories. It's a shame that he didn't get a chance to explore more of that. Overall, I want to say something about, especially to young people. Night of the Living Dead, I think, is a very good example of how, if you have an idea, regardless of what the limitations are, whatever the barriers are, stick to it. You may have the next Night of the Living Dead swirling around in your brain someplace, but the important thing is, once you start it, once you make a commitment to it, you gotta finish it. It can't be a a couple of pages of a script idea that end up in a cardboard box in your garage because nobody will see it. If you have confidence in starting it, have confidence in finishing it.
Just, if I may just add to that, the evolution of zombie from what we called ghouls in Night of the Living Dead, and then their evolution into what we now know as The Walking Dead, and so many different kinds of zombies. I have to say that in my heart, Bill Heinzman, who played our ghoul / zombie, will always be, I call him zombie number one. He, in my mind, set the bar for what I feel. Now, you may feel differently, but I feel that was the true zombie. Bill Heinzman, God rest his soul, what a wonderful fellow he was to work with. I hope some of you got to meet him as well.
Horror films are not really my thing. And I'm amazed. I'm truly, well, I'm delighted that I was in the film, but I'm truly amazed that the genre has just blown up. And I think it had to do with Night of the Living Dead. So I'm delighted to have been part of that.
Well, I'm not really a huge fan of zombie films anymore. I used to be, but I kind of feel like everything there's not a lot to be said about zombies anymore. I mean, and I think I like the way George used them. They were just tools to tell another story. It wasn't really about the ghouls or zombies. It was about something else, and they were just kind of, in the background. Night of the Living Dead isn't really about zombies. It's about people and how they interact with each other. And I think that the more zombie films that I see, it's just about the zombies, and that's kind of like boring. I think that the interesting stories are the ones that are really about the interactions between people and how we can work together or tear our worlds apart. And, how do you deal with a crisis? And I mean, our world is in crisis all the time, but particularly now, and I think we need to maybe take a lesson from Night of the Living Dead and learn to work together.
Yes.
Excuse me, for Russ, when you fall and crack your head on the gravestone, how was that actually done? It looks like you really did.
It does.
We really did it. It was choreographed for the camera that when Bill Heinzman and I struggle and tussle, that we would fall in a choreographed way that my shoulder actually took the impact, and then it was a sound effect. We also, it was a very delicate situation in that we were working in the resting place of other people, and we wanted to be respectful of the area that we were in. We didn't want to indiscriminately, yes, you do see some of the names on the tombstones and so forth, but we wanted to make sure that we had permission to use those names. But in the case of the head hitting the tombstone, it was more a sound effect than it was anything else.
Do you know what that sound effect, how it was produced? Do you know what it was? Anybody?
Want to take a guess?
Oh, you got another beer on.
All right.
Well, I don't know exactly, but I know Gary Streiner, your younger brother, worked as a sound engineer on the movie, but I
Yes.
thought maybe Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman also worked on the sound for the film.
Oh, absolutely, that was their business, yes, yeah. Carl and Marilyn did sound production back in the those days in the 60s, radio production was, you had to create images in people's minds with sounds, and they were very, very good at that. But anyone want to take a shot at what the actual sound was? A watermelon. Boom!
Wow.
Well, I just had a couple. You were talking about the makeup for the naked woman, but in the movie we just see her from behind. Did they give up on the makeup?
Yeah, we only had enough budget to do one side. We had to pick which side that was.
Okay.
And we didn't want to create any frontal nudity censorships for our fledgling movie.
Well,
I have a memory of that night when the entire city, I believe, of Evans City was they all brought their lawn chairs,
Oh my God.
and they were lined up along the perimeter, out of camera range. I guess word got around that there was going to be a nude woman that
oh,
evening.
for Pete's sake.
That same night was that she was there, that Carol was there, was also the night that we were exploding the truck. So we wanted to make sure, that we had the volunteer fire company there, but we stalled and delayed and delayed and delayed, thinking that people would go home. They didn't. We're filming at 3 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's huddled in blankets and lawn chairs, waiting for the nude woman and the truck to explode.
My other question was, regardless of, how you felt like, hey, Dwayne Jones is a great actor, we're glad to have him. Part of what was so transgressive about that film was it really changed. I remember one film scholar said, never since Todd Browning's Freaks did a film change the direction of what was able to be shown, because there was still the backlash against the civil rights area. There was the hippie movement. And so you had a black man taking charge. He ended up being right. He hits a white woman. He fights with a white man and shoots him, and he's the hero. And, I can only imagine, some of the parts of the country seeing this movie, people were probably more pissed off and horrified by things like that than by the zombies killing people.
Well, your observation is absolutely correct. And we didn't think as much about that as Dwayne did. He was more cognizant of that. When we talk about independent film, what does that mean? Well, in the case of Night of the Living Dead, we were the investors, including some of the people here in front of you today, were the investors. So what that meant was we had no studio executives looking over our shoulder saying, well, we don't think you should do that. And the boys upstairs, they're not going for this one. Nobody could tell us what to do. So what that resulted in is we made the movie that we wanted to make. We considered for a very brief time, about a minute, whether to shoot a happy ending. In other words, this was our first time out of the gate with a movie, and it does not end very happily. And so what happens if we get our money, our investors' money, and nobody wants our film because it's such a downer? Well, that's the crapshoot that creative people have to take. And that's what we did, and in the case of Night of the Living Dead, it paid off. Night of the Living Dead is a movie that from the very opening scene starts to take things away from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, if you step through the film, it goes all the way to the end, taking things away from you,
Yes.
and ultimately taking the hero away from you.
Yes.
when Russ mentioned that Dwayne was more cognizant of the racial potential here, if I may, when we did our scene, originally Barbara was to strike Ben 3 times in her anger, wanting to get out to find Johnny. That was upsetting for Dwayne. He spoke with George and said, I am not comfortable having that happen. It's all right if Barbara hits me once, but I cannot quite do 3 strikes. George totally rewrote it, totally understood his feelings about it, and that's why it ended up the way it was, which I think was totally appropriate.
I know a lot of times, because I've been in a couple movies, that they take a lot of takes a lot of time. How many takes do you have to take on that one to get slapped, was one of the questions?
We didn't have an awful lot of money to waste on repeating. We had film stock and we only had so much of it to use. I would say that we averaged maybe just 1 or 2 shots if it was a serious scene. Some of the bigger scenes with the posses and whatnot, we had a little bit more, but we had to be very careful. We didn't have the luxury of doing what major studios do, and they'll take hundreds of shots.
When the bean counters get involved, there's always the shooting ratio. What's the shooting ratio? What's the shooting ratio? That means that in Night of the Living Dead, Night of the Living Dead is a 93-minute film. Our shooting ratio was about 3 to 1. So for every foot of 35 millimeter film that ended up getting used, we shot 2 to 3 more feet that didn't get into the film.
Well, definitely a wonderful job on it. And but I was curious, how come your name wasn't put in the credits of movies? I know back in the 40s, a lot of times 30s, even when we had a lot of lines, sometimes they did not make the credit. But since you were investing in the movie as well, your name didn't go in the credit.
The interesting question. Being one of the producers along with Carl Hardman, one of our jobs was to make up who would be credited in the film. Since I was involved in the film, my brother Gary was involved in the film, my mother Josephine was involved in the film, her car was involved in the film. I didn't want the credits to take on the impression that it was somehow the Streiner show. It was far from that. So I decided to leave my Johnny credit out. I never took credit as Johnny. I did take credit as a co-producer with Carl, but Johnny never got a credit.
Never knew that story. You learn something new every time you go to one of these.
So my question kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier that you guys made the film that you wanted to make, and I was wondering with how the film is kind of viewed, kind of somewhat controversial, you know, with the selection of Dwayne, and with the film's kind of political and social commentary, like was that your guys' like intentions to be controversial, or is it more so you guys just set out to make the best film possible?
Dwayne was the best actor for that part, and that's why he got the part. As we said before, he was more concerned about how the film would be viewed in various parts of the country than we were. We were clever about some things, but we were really dumb about some other things. We never even thought about, well, maybe people in certain parts of the country won't like this juxtaposition of white men and women juxtaposed with a black guy. We never thought about it. You know?
But what you did say about wanting to make the best film we could, it was lovely being independent because we did have greater freedom to do that. But I, as a young actress at that time, was so thrilled to have the opportunity to make a feature film that my sense for all of us was we worked our tails off to make what we felt was the best we could do with the resources, both financial and otherwise, that we had. That really was at the heart and soul of it. We didn't laugh because, oh, we're making a silly horror film. We took it dead seriously. It really was. And I hope that as the years have gone by, that people sense that we were serious about what we were creating.
This may sound silly, and so many people have probably come up to you and said this, but was it your idea to say, they're coming to get you, and did Boris Karloff say anything about that?
I don't know if he did, but I borrowed from him just a little bit. The line was actually written, but it was written a little bit differently. But when it came to filming it, and Johnny being the whiner that he was, and tormentor that he was of Barbara, it just occurred to me that Johnny would deliver the line in his tormenting way, borrowing from Boris Karloff, "They're coming to get you, Barbara."
And I have a couple more round of questions. I'll start at this end this time. I want to know, what was your reactions from friends and family when the movie was released, and then even later, years down the line?
Well, I was able to invite a couple of my friends to the premiere, and they were thrilled to be there. And I spent most of the movie turned around watching their reactions to the various scenes because I knew what was going to be coming, and so it was fun. I mean, my friends were really into it. I think my mother took some flack, from people that she knew, how could you let your daughter be in this terrible movie? And she said, but it's a movie, it's not real. She knows the difference. Back off. So, but
Good mom.
yeah, she was. I mean, she was kind of a horror fan too. I used to watch movies with her, and so that's where I got my love of horror. Was not from my dad, but from my mother. So, yeah, but everybody at that time gave a positive response, and I felt very, very lucky.
I still get from family and friends and people that I meet along the way that it was such a wonderful thing to be able to be in a movie, and it was such a wonderful movie to be in, and a lot of I can't think of the word. Anyhow, very positive. It was very positive feedback, and I still get very positive feedback.
The premiere was a big night for all of us. And I remember the limo came, and my whole family went. And I remember having my hair done in this upsweep, and I had about 1 million bobby pins holding it together, and a wonderful dress. Oh, it was just, it was a glorious evening. And I think my parents were, that evening, it all kind of came together. They've done it. And I think they were very proud of us all. And I don't really know, my parents didn't talk about it a lot. They were very quiet people. And, but I think they were very, very proud that it was done, and that it was truly a scary movie. Yes.
My parents received similarly to what Kyra said, in that how could you let your daughter be in something like that, especially with children hiding under their chairs because everybody died. But as the film went on, I think people had more and more perspective about what the film actually was about and how it was done. That flack fell away, and people then began to think, maybe this has more to it than we originally thought. So that,
we did put together a very large premiere, a 1,400-seat theater, which was filled. Limos, lights, big celebratory event. And my grandmother got her first ride in a limousine, and she was enthralled with everything that was going on. Oh my goodness, my grandson Russell, look what he's been involved with. She knew we were making a movie. She had no idea what the subject matter was. None. So comes the first scene with Barbara and Johnny, and granted, the theater's all dark now. Barbara and Johnny and messing around in the cemetery. Then comes Bill Heinzman. The fight starts. He knocks my glasses off, and out of the darkness of the theater you hear, "Russell, he broke your glasses."
And to wrap this up, I just want to ask you all again, as young actors and filmmakers in general, you all were young, some younger than others, right? What was a moment on the set that taught you something important and that maybe you refer back to later on in life?
Bosco is delicious. That's what they use for blood, and so I recommend if you're ever making a movie that requires blood, and it's in black and white, use Bosco. Film's great.
I was the same age, I am the same age as Judy. I was 20 years old and a college student, and I had a great time. I mean, I know the actors that were involved, seriously involved, took this all very seriously, and that's part of why the movie's successful. But us on the fringes, it was a wonderful time. We'd sit in the kitchen and talk about if a tree falls in the forest, does it make noise? A very college-like thing at the time. So I don't remember any lifelong lessons from it. I just remember it was a good time, and I'm glad I was able to do it.
A lot of us wore different hats during the making of the film. You just did it. You wanted to do anything you could to help. And when you start something, you finish it. That's my takeaway.
That's an interesting question. I was talking with some wonderful people this morning, as I have yesterday. It's been absolutely incredible conversations. What I have come away with performing in general is believability. If an audience member can come away from, whether it's horror or romance, whatever it is, and say, I believed that person. I believed she was truly who she was. She took me into her story. That has stayed with me all my performance life. Unfortunately, I'm still out there trying my best to do it. But believe, if you can produce something that somebody believes, then you've done the job you were hired to do. I think that's what I walked away with.
If I have taken anything away, it's, first of all, we are all, every single one of us, has some unique qualities as individuals. Talk to other unique individuals. You can never, ever tell what's going to come out of healthy collaboration. And don't be afraid of it, just explore a little bit. When I was teaching young film students, and the area of making documentary films would come up, and their eyes would roll back, and they'd, oh, make a documentary, what's that all about? Well, guess what? You may have an aunt who is a textile artist. You may have a neighbor who has a magnificent beer can collection. Nothing is out of reach of good documentary exploration if you've got the intellectual curiosity to go out and find it. So keep your intellectual curiosity alive.
All right, guys, with that, I want to close this by saying it is an honor to just be in the same room as you all. But a great honor to get to talk to you and hear your stories. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You ought to do your headshot on her.